Welcome, everyone. My name is Lynne Reeves Griffin. I write domestic suspense as Lynne Reeves, and I'm the author of The Dangers of an Ordinary Night. And I'm here tonight, virtually in Barbara's Bookstore in Chicago, speaking with the talented Sylvie Perry, who is the author of The Hawthorne School. And we're excited tonight to come to you because we are both counselors and we are both novelists, and we have just a lot to talk about related to family life. A few logistics tonight. We welcome you to put questions in the Ask a Question feature. We also encourage you to take a look at the links that Barbara's Bookstore have provided for us that give you a bit of a discount tonight on the books, The Dangers of an Ordinary Night and The Hawthorne School. Those links are available to you. And if you use the event code, you can get a little bit of a discount. And we hope that after our conversation tonight, you'll be excited to read our stories about schools and parents and vulnerable children. I am going to turn it over to Sylvie to introduce herself, and then we're going to jump right into a conversation about our books and how and why we found one another and why we think our books are simpatico.
Thank you, Lynn. And yes, thank you, Crooked Lane Books, and thank you, Barbara's Bookstore. And thank you all for being here. And we're really excited about sharing our experience as counselors and also as writers. I am a licensed clinical professional counselor, and I practice psychotherapy. And a couple of my areas of special focus are narcissistic abuse. And also I work a lot with young mothers, with young mother issues. And as an author, I began writing uplit, so uplifting literature, under a different pseudonym, which was Keziah Frost. And then I came over to the dark side and started writing psychological suspense. And that is this debut psychological suspense novel, The Hawthorne School. So shall we talk about our books, Lynn?
Sure. Let me just say a little bit about my counseling background, because we're similar in some ways, except that my preparation for counseling was a little bit different. I'm a registered nurse. And then I went on to get advanced degrees in counseling. And I mostly work with parents who are either struggling with their role as parent and or they are parenting children who have vulnerabilities in learning or vulnerabilities in their physical makeup. So I turned my attention to writing domestic suspense when an idea for a novel came to me that was about the impact of addiction on families. I see a lot of families who there is an undercurrent of addiction within the family or either within the partnership of parents. And it became really clear to me that there was a lot going on for the people who were thinking about how addiction impacted their marriage or parenting. So I'm dealing with a debut in domestic suspense as well and write fiction under Lynne Griffin. So we really do have similar backgrounds, and it's really kind of neat to think about.
And there's that area where the books intersect in theme too, because there is an addiction theme running through both books.
Yes, yes, definitely. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the Hawthorne School, and then I'll talk a little bit about The Dangers of an Ordinary Night, and we'll see what we come up with.
I will do that. So this is the Hawthorne School, and I've got to show it to you because I love the cover. I don't know if you can see it very well on the screen, but you can see it's a Gothic architecture design. And you can see the mother and the little boy walking into the school. So the story is about Claudia, and she is a very young and insecure mother with a little boy who is presenting behavior problems. His preschool really doesn't want him to stay there anymore because they don't know how to handle him. She feels like she must be a terrible mother and she doesn't know what she's doing. And then she hears about a wonderful school on the outskirts of town. And this is a school that's kind of a mixture of Montessori and Waldorf and Scandinavian nature schools. And she assumes, of course, she's not going to be able to afford a school like that for her son. But she can't resist going for a tour because she hears such things about it. When she goes, it looks wonderful. It looks perfect. But the tuition seems like it will be a problem. However, the director of the school seems to see something really special in her little boy, Henry, and makes things very easy for her to get into this school. And from there on, the story begins. And once Claudia and Henry are in the school, she begins to notice that all is not as it seems.
Yeah, I really loved in your book how you lured the reader into thinking that it was going to be the be-all, end-all place, right? But at the same time, we see that your main character, Claudia, is really vulnerable to people telling her what she wants to hear.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that was really interesting. In my novel, The Dangers of an Ordinary Night, it's also set in a school, but this is a very unique school as well. It is a performing arts high school. And so in this school, there is enormous pressure on students, but it's also enormous pressure on their parents because each of the parents have the idea that their children are going to be in the school and they're going to become famous. This is not just an ordinary school, it's by audition only. And at the opening of the story, there's an audition in which two girls come out of the school late at night after auditioning, and they go missing. And a few days later, one of them is alive and the other one is not. And what happens is the media descends on this high school, and we start seeing a community of people who each perhaps played a role, and it becomes really unclear how all of these families collide and what happens when we try to uncover what happened to the girls. So again, we have a school where there's a lot of high stakes parenting, a lot of high pressure parenting, and a lot of secrets revealed.
Exactly, a lot of secrets going on behind the curtain, sort of. And the element of addiction is in both of our novels too. And that is, would you like to tell something about the addiction theme in your novel?
Sure. I actually thought at one point that I was going to be writing nonfiction about addiction. So I had heard again, as I mentioned in my counseling practice, the theme running through family struggles. And often there was a thread of addiction, or there was either a substance that was being, abused, or there was some other type of behavioral addiction that was impacting the relationships within the family. And I heard it over and over and over again with no real uniqueness in the story itself, but more the themes that kept emerging, themes of deceit, themes of betrayal, themes of wanting everything to go back to sort of a once upon a time viewpoint. This sort of cycle of addiction where there's someone gets better for a little while, and then there's a relapse. And in that period of time where someone gets better for a while, there's hope that maybe they're going to be fine and everything will be as it once was. But then with inevitable relapses, the cycle starts all over again. So I thought I would write nonfiction about it, but then I really started getting pulled along by this particular story, and suddenly I knew that this particular story and the addiction themes went together. How about you?
In the Hawthorne School, the addiction is really addiction to, you could say, a narcissistic relationship. This book is, you could read it on two levels. You could read it on the obvious level of being a psychological suspense story, but underneath it, you could also see that it's an allegory for an abusive relationship. And really, pretty much any cult leader is going to be a narcissist. And we could get into a lot of details about narcissism versus narcissistic personality disorder. But typically in a narcissistic relationship, there is an element of addiction because a person becomes addicted to the ups and downs and unexpected behavior and the chemical jags that go on in the person's brain with dopamine and cortisol and never knowing what's coming next and trying to get it right. And they don't realize that they are addicted. And then also the narcissist is addicted to the victim's pain. And so I tried to create this within the school so that the school is in the role of the narcissist, and our character is going in just like anybody would into a narcissistic relationship, at a point of vulnerability in one's life, at a point of needing someone to have all the answers, and then someone appears and seems to be the answer to everything and seems too good to be true. And the mask doesn't fall until you are well and truly trapped. And then the addiction cycle begins. And onlookers can be very confused and wonder, why doesn't she leave? She could just leave, but they don't understand the addictive nature of it. Also, I think, as you mentioned, denial plays a role, I think, in any addiction. And the denial is about wanting to believe the beautiful thing, and not wanting to believe that you've made a terrible mistake or that things are really as bad as you sometimes realize they are. You tell yourself you're probably imagining things, or probably things are going to get better now. And that's part of addiction, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. You talk about the masks that people wear with addiction, and that, and we know that in the psychological literature and the research, it tells us that part of the deceit or the masks that people wear is the cycle of addiction trying to protect itself, right? Because to own up to it is to move away from that craving and not get that craving met. So it's really fascinating trying to explain to people, and I think that's why fiction is such a wonderful vehicle, that this is part of what the experience is like. In my story, because I set it in a performing arts high school, I really, really played with the idea of the masks people wear. And I really tried to play with the roles that people assume, and that how once someone assumes a particular role, it's very, very difficult to play another role, right? So in my story, the wife of the man that struggles with a gambling addiction, her role is caretaker. Her role is keeping all the pieces together, right? Dealing with their finances, parenting their daughter. And so she's played that role for such a long time that she loses sight of the fact that she's not playing a role in her own life. She's not creating anything that is uniquely her own experience. She's living through her daughter. She's living through her husband. And I really wanted to play around with that idea of the masks and the roles.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of happens backstage in a family?
Oh, that is
families
really...
can show to the world that all is right,
Yeah, and that is really elegant, with backstage with a family, and also these are stage kids, stage parents. Yeah. Also,
right.
we both have, I don't know if you would call Zeke a villain exactly, but we both have characters who have the first initial Z. So you have a character called Zeke, who he's a hard guy to really warm up to, isn't he? I mean, he's a hard guy to like. He makes a lot of pretty bad mistakes, and he keeps making them.
Yes. There's something funny about him, though. He does make a lot of bad decisions, and he is someone who is creating a lot of havoc in his family. At one point, Nell, his wife, says, Zeke creates a lot of stress in our family. Like, he's kind of like this stressful human. But at the same time, I have a lot of compassion for him, because I see him as someone who's really struggling and is trapped in that cycle. Yeah. And I'm not sure if he weren't struggling with addiction that he wouldn't be more likable, right?
Uh-huh.
And I think that the wife, you talked earlier about in your story why doesn't she just leave? what I wanted to show for Nell was that, yeah, it might be on the outside looking in easy for someone to leave, but it's really hard to leave if you love someone, right?
Yeah.
And she really loves him. And she really believes that maybe the next time he'll get better, you know? So there's a lot of hope in that relationship, which is sad, right? It's sad because the reader can see that it's not going to change.
Yeah. So you're really seeing all of your characters with the eyes of a counselor, it sounds like. You're seeing them all with compassion, and you're seeing all of them how they could improve their lives. They could find the path.
Yeah. I hope so, because I really feel like that fiction really is a vehicle for empathy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we look at the fact that people don't struggle on purpose, right? Zeke struggles mightily, and some readers may or may not. I don't condone his choices, but I'm hoping that readers can see that maybe he wasn't always there, right? And maybe under different circumstances he might be somewhere else, right? There's a stage mother character in the book that a lot of people have been talking to me about, and she too is hard to like, and yet she's pretty redemptive at the end, right? Because she too gets caught in this cycle of the role that you play. So yeah, I like to think there's empathy for all of them.
Yeah, exactly. And Cynthia Rollins is the family counselor. And I was wondering, is she modeled on anybody in particular?
Well, you know, everyone wants to know if she's me.
Of course.
And I would have to say, I think all of my characters are a little bit me, sure. and there are a lot of them that are not me at all, right? So I think Wally Lamb once said something that I just adored. He said that every one of his characters is like a piece of stained glass. There are little fragments that are him, but the general picture is of something else, right?
Yeah.
And that's a really cool way to think about it.
That is a very cool way to think about it. Yeah. How
about you? How do you feel about some of your villains?
Well, yeah, some of my villains, actually, I guess there's more than one, but the main one, you know, I don't really feel in this book that there's a little of me in every character. In other books I've written, yes. I would not really like to think that there's any Zelma in me. She is pretty brutal, but you know, emotionally brutal. But yeah, I don't really expect readers to have compassion for Zelma. I really hope that she gives readers the chills. That's what I was going for.
Oh yeah, she does.
I hope. Oh, thank you. Yeah, she's pretty creepy.
But not at first. At first, you really do paint her as someone that the reader can see getting sucked into her promises.
Yeah.
And especially since we don't really know whether or not Henry's issues are because he was in a school that didn't nurture him, or because he really struggles with maybe being on the spectrum or something. Mm-hmm. Since we don't know that, it makes it feel like Zelma's making promises that any parent would want to believe.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And that is so crucial in the whole denial dynamic.
Right. And it's also true of the world that we live in now, where parents who have children who struggle can be preyed upon, sadly, with promises of cures and promises of just the right treatment at what cost.
Yeah.
So I found that interesting.
Yeah, and parents really need a lot more support. So many parents are not getting the support that they do need. It really takes a tribe, a village, an extended family, a wonderful school or something to sort of embrace the struggling parent and their child. And Claudia knows this. She knows that she needs help, and she thinks she's found it. And that's how she falls into the trap. Yes. But yeah, I see all the time that people are struggling with really not knowing what to do or how to handle things. And I think a lot of mothers today, and maybe it's been going on for many generations now, are very hard on themselves. They feel like failures. They feel like they're to blame for everything. And they just can't get it right because perhaps there are so many schools of thought. There are so many systems out there that seem to be telling them how to do things, and yet they try the systems and they don't work, or they try the systems and maybe they don't try them long enough, or they're told that that's the problem. You didn't stick with it long enough. For whatever reason, they blame themselves. And it's really a hard struggle.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think that, one of the things that I was trying to explore in my book too, that we share sensibilities, is that we're very judging of parents. Instead of offering a helping hand, there's a lot of judgment. And so unfortunately, the experience of being a mother is a very isolated one. And what I would try to explore in my book was, if you're isolating mothers and only judging, then how can they ask for help when they need it? If they think they're going to be judged, it makes it very hard. And so, one of the things that I wanted to do was to encourage readers to talk about these issues through the novel, because I believe we don't really need to be keeping these private struggles so private, like that these things are undiscussable. Yeah. And on that note, I'm going to just do a little segue and say that, please put some questions in the chat for us, because Sylvie and I think it's all discussable. So we'd love for you to ask questions about any of the topics that we've touched on so far, and really why, two counselors would choose to write fiction. I think it's just it's an interesting question.
Yeah, that would be great. Interaction is really good. So just before we came on, we were talking and we touched on one thing that I thought we could also bring out here in our talk, which is about, which do you like better, composition or revision?
Oh, I'm a revision person all the way. I love to take something that's a complete draft, even if it's a messy first draft, and I love to rip it apart and start over. I love to rearrange things. I'm completely comfortable with eliminating characters and taking out subplots and adding things. So when I'm writing a novel and I am drafting something new now, I'm eager to get to that draft, because then there are so many possibilities for me. But it's the blank page that I'm not the biggest fan of. How about you?
Interesting. Just the opposite, exactly the opposite. So when I'm composing, I just feel like I'm in this, what they call the fictive dream. I get up early in the morning, so my unconscious is still kind of engaged, and I write and I write, and I feel like I'm in this other world, and I'm listening to the characters talk as if I'm dreaming almost. I'm writing. That's the easy part. Then when I have to change it, when I have to move things around, or as you say, take out a character, that is very, very hard for me. And, I have to laugh sometimes, because sometimes I'm asked by a beta reader or by an editor to change something or take out a character, for example. And I feel like, but that would be lying. That's not what really happened. And I kind of forget none of it really happened. So it's very hard. And that's one thing that's hard about editing. And another thing that's hard about editing is that, for me, it's kind of like you build a tower, a very tall tower with many bricks, and then you have to take out a character. So you pull out a block and the whole thing could fall. Like, will I really remember to take out every bit of their dialogue, or will I really, or who's going to say their lines if they're gone? Or, it becomes very confusing to me to change it afterwards. And yet editing is extremely important to the process, and you have to edit. Yeah. It's not optional.
Yeah. No, I think I understand that sense that it's sort of like Jenga. If I pull out one of those blocks, the whole thing's going to come down. But at the same time, what's comforting to me, and you've written other novels, so I'm sure this, you can call this up, is that if you've done it before, you know that it rarely falls down. It rarely does. So I think I didn't necessarily know that at the outset when I wrote my first novel, but now I'm writing novel number 6. So I know that it doesn't really crash. And I know that I could always put it back up and take out a different block.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah, there's something to be said for experience. So are you writing another domestic suspense novel now? Or what kind of, what genre are you writing in now?
So that's terrific that you asked me that, because we just got a question from Lisa, and she said, are either one of you working on another book? And yes, I actually have one book in production, and I have one book that I'm drafting. So the book that's in production is called Dark Rivers to Cross, and it's coming out next November, also from Crooked Lane. So when I sold The Dangers of an Ordinary Night, I sold them 2 books. And so this book is coming out in the fall. And then I'm working on a new one that is that one that I'm only about a third of the way into. So what writers know is that when you're writing a book and then putting it into production, and by the time it gets published, there's a number of years between that process. And readers don't always know that there's, from the minute you draft, put one word on the page, until you sell it and until you get it out onto a bookstore shelves, it's a number of years. So I've got one in production and one that I'm drafting.
It's very true. It takes a long time for the book to make it to the bookstore.
It does. It does. How about you? Are you working on something else?
Yes, psychological suspense, and I'm making a lot of notes and getting to know my characters. And yeah, I think there'll be another psychological suspense book coming. I don't want to say too much about it because I'm very superstitious about that. So I say.
Now, how do you feel about writing in this genre versus the other genre? Tell me a little bit about that.
I do like uplit. I would like to write both. I would like to go back and forth, and I think that's okay. You know, I know one of my big role models, one of my favorite writers is Shirley Jackson, and she wrote these spooky kind of books, and then, you know, we know her from the short story The Lottery, and then she also wrote humorous books about raising her children. So yeah, so there's precedent for that. I guess you could write uplit and psychological suspense as well.
Yeah, so, and you have a pen name, so you can really do whatever you want. You're creating your own lanes.
Yeah. There's Keziah Frost books. Those are the uplit, and then there's Sylvie Perry books. Those are the psychological suspense. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to writing more. Oh, speaking of favorite authors, who are some of your favorite authors? I personally like Shirley Jackson, Daphne du Maurier. Those are a couple of my favorites.
Yeah, I love Daphne du Maurier. One of my favorite books is Rebecca. I read it when I was in high school for the first time, and I've read it countless times since.
Same. Yeah.
It has almost everything. The language is gorgeous. The stakes and tension and conflict are great. There's romance. I mean, there's a trial. I mean, it's just great.
It is.
The setting is gorgeous. So there's so much about that book that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I am also a huge fan of Louise Erdrich, who writes stories about her Ojibwe heritage. She's a wonderful writer. She has a new book that just came out called The Sentence, that's set in a spooky bookstore. It's a bit of a ghost story.
That sounds good.
Yep. So that's really great. I love her. I love Tana French, who's an Irish writer who writes psychological suspense, detective kind of stories. And along that vein, I like William Kent Kruger, who wrote This Tender Land, which is a beautiful novel. So I read pretty widely. I think that there's something to learn from everything, you know?
Yeah.
Which is fun.
Yeah. Same here.
Right. A couple more questions.
Oh.
Okay, we have another question. Have either of you sold your books for a screenplay?
We wish.
I have not. I have had a film agent for a few of my books, and I've gotten close a couple of times. But it is a tricky process, and it's hard enough to sell a book. It's super hard to sell a book to film.
Uh-huh.
Anything else? Any other questions? What would you like readers to take away from the writing of and the reading of the Hawthorne School?
Oh, that's a good question. My favorite thing is when I get an email or a message from a reader, and I did get one recently about the Hawthorne School. Don't you love those? If you get a message from somebody, it's to be treasured, that they sat down and took the time to contact you. And I like hearing that people felt absorbed in the story, that it took them away from their concerns and problems for a moment, and that they had escape. And and sometimes, people come away with something to think about from the book, which is, I love that, and it kind of inspires people with some thought, about their own lives in some way. That's always wonderful. So I don't really aspire to amazing things. If people get some escape and some feeling of being able to transport themselves to another world for a while, and then on top of that, they get something to think about, I think I'm satisfied. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's exactly right. I feel like if people choose a novel to read as a book club, back is what they need, right? Is helpful sometimes.
Yeah. So Lynn, as you were speaking, I think the screen was freezing a little bit. So all that I heard was that if people choose it for a book club. Yeah. So would you like to add anything?
So what I would say is that sure. So if people choose it for a book club, am I breaking up now, or am I?
It's better.
You can hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Good. So what I'm hoping is that if people choose it for a book club and they're able to talk about these characters and their struggles, it gives them the safe space to imagine what they think about their own.
Oh, yes.
But a lot of times, and as a counselor, this, sometimes it's very difficult for people to examine their own lives. It's challenging, right?
Yeah.
But to examine these issues through fictional characters sometimes feels safer.
Yes. Yes, very true. Very true. And I know how many times in my own life reading a book has spurred me to think about things that I wouldn't have thought about otherwise. Reading a fictional book. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like it's that vicarious experience that we get, right? To navigate things that either have happened to us or maybe we're afraid will happen to us. And fiction is that safe space to do it. So I can't say enough about that. I think, the novel is a really powerful tool for people. Maybe self-help isn't what they want to read. Maybe it's fiction,
Yeah. And it's a powerful tool for empathy. I remember reading a while back that one of the best ways to teach children empathy is to get them reading fiction, because when they read fiction, they're going to put themselves in the shoes of the character. And that's what empathy is. It's putting yourself in someone else's place, imagining what it would be like to be them.
That's right.
So
that's right.
We
need more of that these days, don't we? I mean, there's no doubt about that. We have another question in the chat. What advice would you give to new writers? What do you think about that?
Well, I would give encouragement to new writers, because we need everybody's voice. And I think you have to be prepared to be persistent, and you have to know that this is what you want, and you have to set your routine. And some writers would say you don't need a routine and you don't need discipline, and that's the way they write. But I think the vast majority of writers, have a routine, and they are very loyal to very faithful to their routine, whatever it may be. And for many people, it's, you get up and you write first thing in the morning for 2 hours, or you get up and you write until you have 1,000 words, or whatever it is that you decide. Or maybe for you, it's going to be late at night, but you have a certain time you report and you treat it like a job.
Right. I think I have a friend who's a writer who calls it, even if, like you said, even if they don't show up first thing in the morning, or even if they don't do 1,000 words a page, 1,000 words a day, they at least have their own routine and structure. And she says it's okay to have a non-process process, mm-hmm. but you still have to have discipline. So the non-process process is, it's discipline however you define it, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I would say is that it's really important for writers to know why they write.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't understand why you write and what it does for you, the world may or may not publish it. The world may or may not respond well to it. But if you know why you write, if you understand what you're getting from the experience, you will continue, I think.
I love that. That is so good. And the why is important for any goal you have, anything that you want. If you don't know why, the motivation will fade. You have to be very clear on why you want this thing. Whatever it is, you want to learn a language, you want to write a book, you want to learn a sport, whatever it is, if you know why, and it probably would be good actually to sit down and write it. Why? Write a whole page. Why?
Yes. Oh, I totally agree. Writing it down is huge, and then posting it somewhere where you like to work as a reminder.
Yeah.
I also would say we could add another book recommendation to our list here, which is that anybody that wants to figure out the why they write and figure out how to become dedicated new writer would really enjoy Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way.
Oh, yes.
It's just a marvelous a book that we return to again and again for its ideas around making writing almost a spiritual practice, right? And as therapists, I can't say enough about writing as a therapeutic practice. So,
yeah, even writing a journal. If you're not sure yet, if you think, oh, I'd like to write a book, but I don't know what the book would be about, just begin with a journal and then just begin exploring possibilities. Write a page about, what if I wrote a book about this scenario, or, this is the genre that I love, or just kind of explore it in your journal. And that will get you into the habit of putting pen to paper if you use pen and paper.
Yes. Well, I think that this is a perfect segue to turn ourselves back to Barbara's Bookstore and say that we hope that in addition to buying our books this evening, The Dangers of an Ordinary Night and the Hawthorne School, I would say go to Barbara's and buy a journal, because they have journals on their commerce site. So perhaps, getting started as a writer and a reader means your books plus your journal.
Yes, that's a great idea. Yeah, and thank you to Barbara's Books for hosting this.
Yes, thank you so much for hosting us. It's been our pleasure. Oh, we got one more question. We've got Lisa wondering if we base our characters on people we know. I often get the question, do you base them on your clients? And the answer is absolutely no.
No, that's a no-go. That's a no-go. Yeah, every counselor would know that is not ethical and that is not done. No.
Exactly.
But there are certain commonalities of being a human being. We all know what it's like to be insecure. We all know what it's like to be dealing with something that we don't know how to handle. We've had that experience, and so in that sense. But when I think of Claudia, for example, I think of myself as a young mother when I was in my early 20s with my first child and just feeling like I am supposed to take care of this child. Like, I don't know anything, you know? And I remember what that was like. Yeah. So that's Claudia is probably a lot of what I was like at that age, just looking for somebody to tell me how to do it.
I think it's important to draw on that, on the experiences that we've had, even if they're not exactly the same. So, you know, even though I've never, my husband doesn't have any issues with addiction. My husband had a serious illness at one point, and he's well now. But I drew on those fears, and I drew on that caretaking experience. So I think we draw as writers on these moments that we have, even if we conflate them with something else.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what makes them hopefully feel authentic to readers.
Yeah, it's that stained glass image that you drew later. I drew earlier. That it's bits and pieces of things, sort of like in a dream where you see a person, but they're really part somebody else. You know, that's kind of how it goes.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting work we do, and hard. But thanks everyone for coming. We really appreciate you taking the time to sit with us tonight and ask questions. And again, thank you to Barbara's Bookstore. We hope that you will go and buy something from them for their hard work as an independent bookstore. We don't know what we would do without our wonderful, wonderful independent bookstores. We cherish them and want to see them thrive.
Yes, hear, hear.
Great. All right. So it says here to follow them on Instagram and to go to the bookstore to stay up to date on their upcoming events. Yes, if you go to the events page on their website, it'll tell you all of the events that are coming up in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you.